Well, today we got to hear from and learn a little bit more about new Seahawks head coach Mike Macdonald. His first press conference alongside John Schneider was today at the VMAX Center. The process has been so quick that Coach Macdonald said he doesn't even know where the indoor to the VMAC is, and John admitted he hasn't even gotten the full tour yet. But we're going to take you on a little tour of that press conference. I'll give you my 5 takeaways, things that I took away from that press conference, things we learned today about Mike Macdonald, and some things that we still don't know coming up next on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast, in-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
All right, let's get right into this, you guys. Hit that like button, the bell button for notifications on the YouTube channel. Subscribe, of course, so you always know when there is new content. If you prefer audio podcasts, I'm everywhere. You can subscribe on whichever platform you prefer. If you want to listen to episodes without ads, you can subscribe on Spotify for 99 cents a month. I'll put that link in the description. And if you want to support me, you like what I do, you can buy me a coffee or a beer at buymeacoffee.com. Link also in the description. This is going to be a little bit of a rapid fire episode. I have places to be and things to do. But I wanted to react to this. And I did pull some audio from the press conference. So I wanted to do it in kind of a quick 5 takeaways format for y'all here today. But first, before we get into that, a little bit of breaking news. Because one of the things we're going to talk about here in a minute is the biggest question on everybody's mind now is offensive coordinator. Okay, we got the defensive side of the ball taken care of, right? We've got one of the young, brightest defensive minds in the league, according to pretty much everybody. What about the offense? Because a lot of the really, really attractive offensive coordinator candidates have already been hired. Came out today that Arthur Smith was somebody that John Schneider was doing work on and considering, but he couldn't wait, took the job in Pittsburgh. There are questions about whether Eric Bieniemy might be considered if he's let go, not retained by Dan Quinn, who also, speaking of news, got the Commander's job today. Really happy to see that. I think Quinn deserved one of these jobs, and it'll be interesting to see how he does in Washington now, especially after so many of you were convinced that he wouldn't have been the right choice here. Macdonald was the choice. John Schneider talked about that today. The choice at offensive coordinator, though, still up in the air. But then about a half an hour ago before I hit record, word coming out from a number of sources, legitimate sources, that former University of Washington offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, who followed Kalen DeBoer to Alabama just 2 weeks ago, who did such a wonderful job with Michael Penix Jr. in that offense at Washington, is under consideration for the job here in Seattle. And I would say just the way that these things usually work, I would say that it's likely that he's at the top of the list. That so shortly after the press conference, his name comes out, but no others. And it comes out from a number of different sources. Wouldn't surprise me if John and Mike went directly from the podium to the phones, and that's the guy they're looking at. If that's the choice or whoever the choice may be, I'll get into that in more detail when that happens. But my initial thoughts are that without being an X and O guru myself, that the things that I understand about what made Ryan Grubb so good is my understanding is that he incorporated more quote unquote NFL throws into his offense than a lot of colleges, that he wasn't air raid spread based like so many offenses are, that there were more NFL concepts in his passing game. And it's been talked about as one of the advantages perhaps of Michael Penix in this draft process, is he's a guy that's made some NFL type reads and throws. But also just the eye test, watching UW from being here in Seattle, is a word that was used a lot today at the press conference with Schneider and Macdonald. That's adaptability. There are games, I've seen it up close as a Coug, as a WSU alum. There are games, I'm thinking of the Apple Cup 2 years ago in Pullman, where once he senses weakness, he picks at it. And once he realized that WSU couldn't get home on the pass rush last year and couldn't cover him deep with all the weapons they had there at wide receiver, he just went downfield viciously like a shark with blood in the water. But then I've also seen games where he would ride Dylan Thomas 30 times and run it down a team's throat if that's what was working, if that's where the weakness of the defense was. So very, very interesting. It's never worked in the NFL, but I think one thing that we found out today is that John Schneider is very open-minded about where to go, and he relies on a lot of input. And, think about this. Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer in the University of Washington just faced who in the national championship game? University of Michigan. Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh's brother, John. Coach Mike Macdonald. There's relationships there. Mike worked for Jim for a year. He's going to get insight, right? What was that offense like to prepare for? Keep that in mind. Let's get into this because, again, we're going to kind of run through this a little quicker than I normally do. My first takeaway from the press conference today, John Schneider was beaming in a way that I've never seen him before. Just couldn't stop smiling. Cheeks were rosy. Almost looked like he was blushing, like he was giddy. We've seen him seem really pleased before with how drafts have gone. But I don't think we've ever seen him like that. I mean, this felt like a release. This felt like we were watching a guy that was getting the opportunity of a lifetime, something he's waited 14 plus years for and worked to get to this point. He finally got to hire his own coach. From everything it sounds like, he was given autonomy. Jody Allen and Burt Cold and the higher-ups at Vulcan and with the Seahawks said, we trust you, go get your guy. And when John Schneider talked 2 weeks ago in his press conference about how he was excited to learn what he could through this process, he put his money where his mouth is. He took an exploratory approach to this process. Turned over every stone, considered all backgrounds. And he mentioned in the press conference that early in the process, he heard from some other guys that he knows. I talked about on the show, he confirmed it today that he got some insight into how well Mike Macdonald was interviewing with other staffs. He interviewed with 6 of the teams that had openings of the 8. That's how in demand he was. So he knew enough to know that he wasn't going to jump the gun on any of these other candidates until he got a chance to talk to Mike Macdonald. But he was beaming. He looked like a guy that got his guy. And even though he was completely upfront and transparent about the fact that, he even admitted kind of a moment of levity in the press conference was when he said that, he was praying extra hard at church last Sunday because he wanted the Lions to lose and he wanted the Ravens to lose. And then he talked about how he went to Detroit first. Then he went to Baltimore. He never met Mike Macdonald before, but he didn't shy away from the fact that Ben Johnson was a significant, serious candidate for this job. He didn't try to, candy coat that like, no, this was our guy all along, the way teams do sometimes when they clearly got their 3rd or 4th choice. Like I'm sure the Commanders, when they introduced Dan Quinn as their coach today, you'll hear some language shaped around the idea that this was our guy all along. But John Schneider was beaming. And then when asked about what made Macdonald stand out, he had an interesting answer. He talked about Macdonald's qualifications, but then also kind of a feeling that he had walking away from a couple other instances earlier in his Seahawks career that led him to be as diligent as he's been about this process. Here's what he had to say about Mike Macdonald.
The product is the product. He's done it. You've seen it. And that's why he was assistant coach of the year. I've had 2 really strong feelings leaving Pittsburgh several years ago. Like we will never, ever look like that again. I think it might've been our first year or second year. I can't remember. It was not cool. And leaving Baltimore this year. And that was not cool. But congratulations.
Kind of a funny moment there. This kind of lends itself to some other reporting we've heard in the last couple of days that, there's one report that Carroll had indicated to the higher ups with the Seahawks that he might be thinking about retirement. So that started some of the wheels in motion. There were other reports that John Schneider kind of had an idea that this might be happening. And these two things obviously would fit together. And so we started doing work on this process at about mid-season, which is about when they played Baltimore. And maybe that was the wake-up call that he's talking about there, that, hey, this isn't working. Something needs to change. And what just happened? He went on to say he had players come up to him on the offense after that game and say, what was that? What just happened to us? What did they just do to us? It's one of the things that I really, really like about John Schneider. He takes that input. He remembers stuff like that. He doesn't just put blinders on, make a decision, and move forward, which a lot of people assumed he was going to do and just hire Dan Quinn to continue the Carroll tree. He just seemed like a guy on Christmas Day who every present he opened was exactly what he had asked Santa Claus for. It came together quickly. That was another thing that stood out to me from this press conference. Not one of my official 5 takeaways, but it came together quickly. They referenced it as a leap of faith, had never talked to each other, didn't know each other. Mike Macdonald, well, I'm going to get to that. I was about to give away something. Let's get to the second one. The second one, my second takeaway from this, Mike Macdonald is not Pete Carroll. He's not. And I already had, I had a buddy of mine text during the press conference and say, man, this guy's boring. We had kind of heard that. There was a reporter on Seattle Sports 710 from Baltimore earlier this week that said, hey, different personality, kind of dry, but not when he's coaching, not when he's on the sideline, not the way he interacts with players. And you could see it as you got deeper into the press conference. And I'm excited to hear some of the other interviews that reporters were able to do with him after the press conference, where the questions will be more about football. My God, the Seattle media. Half an hour worth of questioning, and we didn't get offensive coordinator or scheme questions until 25 minutes in, or any questions about the quarterback or anything like that. It was all a lot of puff stuff, a lot of personal stuff. Thank goodness for guys like Corbin Smith that were there and actually asking him about scheme and the offense. But he's a different guy, and you're just going to have to get used to that. It'll take some time. He's very just straightforward. And you're not going to get a lot of the, maybe it's a situation where it's substance over style. But I will say this, and this is how I responded to my buddy who texted me, Matt LaFleur, Zach Taylor, Kyle Shanahan. Not exciting, not fun to listen to, boring as hell in their press conferences, unless you can get them onto a tangent about X's and O's, and then it's pretty fascinating. But personality-wise and demeanor-wise, the way they come across, very, very similar. Not everyone's going to be Pete Carroll, and not everyone's going to be like a Sean McVay. Also interesting that Pete was not in the building. Was not there, which I think is a good thing. You don't want to have that shadow hanging over Mike Macdonald. I think at some point we'll hear from Pete, and he'll react to the hire. They've never met, Macdonald admitted today. But also this, I've been saying it since the first day. Some of you still refer to Pete as having a front office position. Some people, even in the media, have still referred to the idea that he'll have influence or he'll be there as a mentor or a guide. He's not going to have an office in the building. He's not going to be around. The analyst thing was just a nice way to kind of sugarcoat being fired. You know, I'm sure John's still going to text him and call him, but he's not going to have a desk at the VMAC. Takeaway number 3, adaptability is key. We heard that word over and over and over in this thing. And he really emphasizes it. Like, no matter which way you ask him a question, he talks about flexibility. And at one point, he even said, I can't tell you how our defense is going to look here because we don't know what we're good at yet. Like, he hasn't even started the evaluation process, right? Other than, he was asked a general question about other players that he's familiar with. And he said, not only when we play them, but there's cross-referencing, right? As you're preparing for another team, you're watching film and there's Seattle, as an opponent. So he has some familiarity in that way. He did specifically mention Devin Witherspoon, called him Spoon, because they evaluated him in the draft process, even though they didn't have a shot to get him because they didn't draft high enough. But so he's familiar with his game. I would imagine in a very similar vein, he's probably pretty familiar with Jordan Brooks from going through that draft process 4 years ago. He was intimately involved with the linebackers at that point in Baltimore, and Brooks was taken just before Patrick Queen. So there's some familiarity there. That'll be a fascinating decision on what they do at linebacker. He mentioned the fact that that's always been where his attachment is. It was early in his career. But that's what he talked about it over and over and over again, that, we're going to fit the system and what we do to what we do well, and play to our strengths, mask our weaknesses, and get the most out of the players we have on hand. And I think the consensus, the majority would agree that the last couple of years in the Carroll regime, that's what was missing. that when things weren't going well on defense, many of us had questions about personnel usage and on offense too, to a certain extent. But he just kept hammering that home, the adaptability part of it. And that applied to his approach to the coaching search. I was just as impressed with that. Like, he went into this thing with just as much of an open mind as John Schneider did in finding a coach, that he didn't have any preconceived notions, that he had heard there was interest from Seattle, but he didn't know because he was busy, and he took these other interviews. Here's what Mike Macdonald had to say about his approach to the interview process.
Our mentality going in was just let's go with an open mind. And if there's a great opportunity with a great partnership that feels like it's the right thing, then that'd be something you're willing to pursue. And then we had some great conversations throughout the process. But like I said, when we started talking about vision and how we wanted to play and the direction that I felt like how I'd like to take the team and how that paralleled what they saw, it just became very clear that the thing that was the thing that you're looking for. So it made sense at that point.
Vision and clarity were two words that we heard a lot in this press conference. And this very clearly became a story that these are two guys that didn't know each other at all. They didn't really have any strong connections, but the minute they met, they realized they were on the same page. You know, Schneider talked about how they flew in Monday night to Baltimore, met Monday morning, or met Monday night, I think it sounded like. And he said he crushed it, knocked it out of the park, and then we got it done. Like, that second interview that Macdonald reportedly was flying in for yesterday was not an interview at all. He was bringing his wife, and they were here to sign. That it just came together that way. And Schneider just knew that this was his guy. And Macdonald knew that this was the opportunity, because it's also been reported that on the plane flight to Seattle, the Commanders called again to take one last shot. The Commanders with the second pick in the draft, 3 picks in the top 40, I think. The most cap space in the league, something like $70 million. A new GM who's widely respected, a new ownership who is getting a lot of praise. They're East Coast. He mentioned that numerous times today. That's where they're from. And yet he felt strongly enough about the connection he felt with John Schneider and their vision that he chose this job. And he's going to move he and his family all the way over to the West Coast. Then he was finally asked about offensive coordinator and scheme and football stuff. Thank you, Corbin. And that's the big question on everybody's mind, is the offensive coordinator job. And he was asked, is it important to have someone with experience calling plays? And I thought this was interesting.
It's not near the top of the list. We're looking for the right person to come in here and build this thing. So we want someone that's open-minded, that has a growth mindset, that can connect with their players and build a system, that's unique to the Seattle Seahawks, that's going to live here for a long time, and he's going to be the one spearheading it.
Yeah, so I guess it shouldn't be a surprise, right? Because everything we've heard so far from John and Mike is we're going to be open-minded. We're going to consider everything. We're going to pick the best guy. That's a running theme here. And so that's why that's my other takeaway, is that the offensive coordinator doesn't need experience. The first guy that I thought of when I heard him say that was T. Martin, who's his quarterback's coach in Baltimore. Not his quarterback coach, but the quarterback coach. There are a lot of experience in college as an offensive coordinator. Had an up and down record there. Had some good years with Sam Darnold at USC, and then got fired after Darnold left because things didn't go well. And then he's had some experience coaching receivers and quarterbacks, and carried the assistant head coach title for a while as well. That's the first guy I thought of. Then these Ryan Grubb reports came out. Now, he's obviously called plays for the last 4 or 5 years for DeBoer. Actually going back farther than that. Grubb isn't as young as you would think that he is, but hasn't done it in the NFL. So I think that's a fascinating answer. You remember the last offensive coordinator search that the Seahawks had before they settled on Shane Waldron, and I think we came to find out later that had a lot of Russell Wilson influence. Remember some of the early names that came out in that search, and there were guys that were old, sort of retread Pete Carroll cronies before the process changed, seemingly at the time, to appease Russell Wilson. But it seems like they are open-minded about everything. I'd kind of given up on the college idea because I just kind of thought the timing doesn't work with where their seasons are at. A guy like, Lincoln Riley's not going to be interested in a coordinator job. Cliff Kingsbury, I didn't like that idea. I'd considered the fact that maybe there's someone out there that we don't know about yet, but I'll give credit where credit is due. A lot of Husky fans have been saying here for the last couple of weeks, Ryan Grubb. And after Macdonald was the choice and we knew it wasn't going to be an offensive coach, a lot of Twitter yesterday, Ryan Grubb. So we'll see how that goes. Might have news by the end of the day. And then that leads us, of course, my fifth takeaway, the QB question. And I would call it up in the air. Maybe a little less so if Ryan Grubb's the coach, right? Because then all the speculation is going to begin about Michael Penix Jr. and perhaps a reunion there. But as much as it was framed as lukewarm in Schneider's press conference a couple weeks ago, and his in the things that he was saying, his assessment of Geno Smith, I thought this was a really great answer from Mike Macdonald. He was asked point blank how he feels about the quarterback situation here in Seattle.
Well, we've played against Geno. He's a really good player. Pretty sure he's at the Pro Bowl right now. But we're going to build around the quarterback. You got to. Just like we said on defense, we built the system around the players on defense. We're going to build it around the players on offense, and the most important player is the QB. So we'll see how the whole situation shakes out over time. But excited to get to meet those guys.
Non-committal, right? Non-denial, however you want to put it. It's he certainly didn't commit to Geno. He said those decisions will have to be made. They'll have to shake out. At least one decision is going to have to be made by February 16th. That's the date when Geno's $12.7 million base salary for 2024 becomes guaranteed. But there's things that can be done after that. The Seahawks could conceivably let that date pass, keep him on the roster, have the guarantee, and then if they decide they want to move forward with Geno as a bridge quarterback or whatever you want to call him, they could rework that, certainly, after the 16th. But interesting to note that immediately at the end of this soundbite that I played for you, Macdonald mentioned Drew. And Drew too, and I can't wait to meet him. Was that a Freudian slip of some kind? Drew Lock is not under contract with the Seattle Seahawks. He is or will be when the league year starts, an unrestricted free agent. He signed a 1-year deal. Did he just kind of let slip that Drew Lock is still in the plans? I do not, under any circumstances, believe that they will just run back the quarterback position in 2024 with Geno Smith and Drew Lock again. But if you're going to release Geno and save the $12-13 million, Drew Lock could be your fallback. We have heard over and over again for the last couple of years, ever since the Russell Wilson trade, that John Schneider really liked that Broncos trade, in part because Lock was in it. He liked him in the draft process, and that he may have liked him more than Pete Carroll did. Maybe this is his opportunity to show that. You move on from Geno, you take some of that savings, you spend it on Drew, you spend it on other players, you draft a quarterback, have someone on a rookie deal, and move forward from there. All fascinating stuff. Again, I'm going to dig into some of the other interviews now with some other people and hopefully get some more football stuff out of it. But, there's only so much you're going to get. They got to hit the ground running now. They got the Senior Bowl this weekend. They got to get ready for the Combine. They got to get a staff hired. Who's his defensive coordinator going to be? There's another piece of audio that I did not capture, but where he talked about the DC spot and how much he trusts guys. And that he said, initially, I'm going to call plays, but whoever I bring in as defensive coordinator, if I feel like, once I feel like the time has come when they're ready and they can do it, then I'm going to have them do it because I'm here to be the head coach. Thought that was a fascinating quote. Denard Wilson has already been hired off that staff as a defensive coordinator. Connor Orr was just promoted by the Ravens to be their defensive coordinator. That's a guy that I liked. Anthony Weaver is interviewing in Miami today. I think he's been interviewed for a number of defensive coordinator spots. He was the assistant head coach and defensive line coach would he rather break away from Mike Macdonald to take a DC job elsewhere, or might he be in play to come here and support Macdonald, especially knowing what Macdonald just said, that he's not a guy that's always going to overshadow you, that, you know, Anthony Weaver comes here as familiar as they are with each other. Maybe he gets to call plays within a year or two. And so maybe it's just as attractive to come here and coach in that same system that he's been in. And then Chris Hewitt, I think, is the other guy, defensive pass game coordinator. Also got some DC interviews this offseason. He could be another one that follows Macdonald, but we'll see how that fills out. Carl Scott, the secondary coach from the Seahawks, it was reported this morning, is going to remain on staff as a senior defensive assistant. Not sure his specific role yet. So there's at least one piece of continuity in the coaching staff, and Scott came highly recommended and with a great reputation when he came over from the Vikings 2 years ago. On offense, I still have my eye on Andy Dickerson. Is that still something that the Seahawks might be interested in doing in bringing him back, keeping him? Or does Ryan Grubb potentially, I don't know the guy's name, but there was some talk this morning about the offensive line coach that was at UW that went to Alabama with that staff and how good he was. UW being named the best offensive line college football last year. And they have a couple of intriguing guys in the draft this year too, coming out off that line. So many connections and intrigue and lots to get to. Lots to get to. Thank you for watching and supporting the show. Welcome to February, everybody. I got to get going, but follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever, and we'll catch up soon. Thanks.